Thank you for listening to this episode of the Feldencast. I'm your host, Ethan Cowan. Hello, welcome to episode 1 of the Feldencast. This is an introductory episode, so if you are like a seasoned Feldenkrais follower, fan, and you're ready to just jump into doing some awareness through movement, you can just skip this episode. Let's go to episode 2, just get started. But on the other hand, if you are interested in getting a little bit more context, about me, about the project, about what Feldenkrais is, how to do the lessons, then this episode might be perfect for you. The episode is a little bit more than 15 minutes long, and it's all just me talking. So I'll give a little bit of a too long didn't listen here at the top, just because this is the internet and who knows how long your attention span is. Basically, I will talk about myself, how I got into Feldenkrais, and then I'll do a little kind of like a practical tips orientation, kind of like when to do the lessons. And then I'll finish off by talking about the scope of the project, like where the project came from and what the kind of overall goal is of the project. Let me just thank you again for listening to this episode. Feldenkrais lessons have made a huge difference to my life. I think they're some of the most interesting things out there. And I'm really glad that you're taking a moment at least to check out the project to see if it might be interesting to you too. Okay, happy listening. Hope you find something worth your while. The first Feldenkrais lesson that I ever did, I was really underwhelmed. I remember I was a senior in college at Oberlin College in Ohio in the United States. And I was taking a class called Introduction to Somatic Studies with a teacher in the dance department. But she was really cool. She wanted to teach like somatics, I guess, to all sorts of people. So there were dancers in the class, but there were also a lot of musicians, because Oberlin has a really good conservatory, so there are a lot of musicians around. And I think there were athletes too, although Oberlin does not have a reputation as like a place to go if you're an athlete, but I think there were some. Anyway, this was like an introduction class, and I remember going to the bookstore and getting the books, and then on the syllabus there were also other requirements, and one thing you had to get was a little pinky ball, which was like this kind of almost like a lacrosse ball, a little softer, that we ended up using to, roll stuff out. Like you brought the ball to class, and then we would learn how to like roll the ball on your foot, or put the ball against a wall and kind of rub your back on the ball, kind of like a bear scratching its back, or I don't know. It was it was an interesting college class to take. I thought it was great. I also remember another time where we were in groups. And, groups of 4 or 5, one person would get down on the floor, and then the other 3 or 4 people would kind of massage the one person all at the same time. I remember that was funny to be doing that in college. So one of the books on the syllabus was by Moshe Feldenkrais, Awareness Through Movement. And from the start, I was kind of mystified by this book. I'm in this class where we're doing all these funny exercises, and then the reading is, I think it's going to be kind of about the body, or like, maybe he came up with a novel way of using the pinky ball, or I don't know what, but the book itself, it kind of read more like a book from one of my philosophy classes. Like, for context, the first line says, "We act in accordance with our self-image. This self-image, which in turn governs our every act, is conditioned in varying degree by 3 factors: heritage, education, and self-education." So, what does that mean? He said some stuff where it's like, wow, there's something to this. I can't quite figure out what he's saying, but this guy knows what he's talking about, even if I don't. So along comes the week in the class where we're supposed to discuss this book. And I'm kind of excited, thinking maybe the teacher is going to be able to shed some light on some of the more obscure corners that I don't really understand. And lo and behold, she doesn't really get it either. I don't remember what we even talked about, but I do remember that feeling of like, wow, nobody gets this. So I remember being really excited when she told us that she was going to have a Feldenkrais practitioner come through the class and talk to us. So the day comes and the Feldenkrais practitioner comes, and we don't end up talking about the book very much, but she has us lie down on the floor, and she basically just takes us through one of those lessons from the book, From Awareness Through Movement. And I don't remember which lesson it was. I actually don't remember anything about the lesson, which is why I started by saying it was kind of underwhelming, my first Feldenkrais experience. But what's interesting to me now is that something must have intrigued me a little bit more than I realized, because I moved to New York after college, and I was really interested in dance, and I was also looking for ways to continue my movement development. And I thought of Feldenkrais. This must have been more than a year later. And so I ended up signing up for like a free introductory workshop at the Feldenkrais Institute. So with David Zemock Burson, who was, later I'd find out was one of Feldenkrais's original American students. And, that time I was definitely not underwhelmed. I was a little bit overwhelmed, actually. I remember he taught this lesson called Arms Like a Skeleton, and within the first 5 minutes, I'd say I had a very, I always refer to it as my conversion experience. It was like a very clear experience of, doing a movement with my shoulder where all of a sudden, like a whole area of my body just melted, and I felt some kind of experience of pleasure and satisfaction and self-acceptance that was really intoxicating, but more than that, kind of nourishing on a deep level. And I knew within that little experience that I wanted to do this activity for the rest of my life, which is, I don't know, that's saying something. So that's just a little bit about me by way of an introduction to this project, the Feldencast. I don't know if this podcast will be the first time you're encountering Feldenkrais, or maybe you're a seasoned follower of the Feldenkrais method. But either way, I hope that you don't have an underwhelming experience. But I also have faith that you'll find what you need. The rest of this little introductory episode will be some thoughts about how to approach the lessons, and some information about the scope of the project and what I'm hoping to achieve with it. So yeah, in a lot of ways, the lessons themselves don't need very much introducing, because they're long sets of instructions, movement instructions that include setups and contextualizations and all sorts of stuff. But I would like to talk just for a moment about when to do the lessons, because I think that's kind of an interesting entry point into understanding more about how they work. So the best time to do one of these Feldencast recordings is actually right before you go to bed, because the lessons, they do a really good job of helping you kind of decompress after whatever happened during your day. And they can also set you up to have kind of a relaxed, easy descent into sleep, into a longer rest. So yeah, evening is a great time to do the lessons. It's also good because you can put on some really comfortable clothes at home, wherever you are. Actually, it's funny, in his book he says the best way to do these lessons is wearing as few clothes as possible. So yeah, nighttime can be a nice time to wear less. But, for a lot of us, it's just nice to put on some comfortable, loose clothing, stuff that's good to move in. And if right before bed isn't a good time for you, then the second best time to do any of these lessons is whenever you don't have to do anything afterwards. I mean, anything compulsory. Like, it's good if you don't have to go to work right after. You don't have to have like a challenging conversation with somebody right after, So in other words, don't crowd your schedule. Don't try to fit this in anywhere. It's better if, when you're done with the lesson, you could go for a walk, or you could do something creative. You could play a little bit. Or yeah, like I said, if you could go to sleep right after, that's also good. And the reasoning behind this is just that these lessons are about generating new kinds of awareness of yourself. And it's good if your new understandings, new awareness don't have to compete with your old habits, the ways that you are without thinking. Another facet of when to do the lessons is about how frequently you might do the lessons. Like, is it good to do one every day? Should you do one once a week? And with that one, I just want to say it's really good if you try to minimize any sense of compulsion, in regard to the Feldencast. Sounds kind of pompous for me to assume that you'd be compelled to do it, but I know a guy who was relatively new to Feldenkrais, and he tried to do like a 30-day Feldenkrais challenge, and he kind of got burnt out on it after a little while. He didn't make it to the end of the 30 days. And we kind of were talking about it afterwards. We were joking a little bit about how with Feldenkrais, it might be like a 30-day challenge might be more like, how slowly can you do like 30-day challenge? Like, how many months could you make it take to do a 30-day challenge? But, on the other hand, sometimes it's really great to do a lot of Feldenkrais lessons in a short amount of time. Like, I've done workshops before where there were like, 4 lessons in a day, for multiple days on end. And that kind of intense experience can really lead to some profound reorganization. And it's good. Like, these lessons are all kind of related to one another. So it's good to do the lessons with frequency such that the relationships between the different movement sequences can start to reveal themselves to you. Like, you don't want to wait long enough between lessons so you forget what you did in the last one. So long story short, with frequency, you got to feel it out. You got to feel, when you're interested, how much feels like enough, how much feels like too much. And that's a frequent kind of subject matter for Feldenkrais lessons. What's too much and what's not enough and what's just right. So you'll find out. Like I said at the beginning of this little introduction, if you feel ready to try one of these lessons or just get to the point, then go for it. You should just continue now. But I'm going to end this little introduction by talking about the scope of the project, just in case you're interested. The lessons on this podcast are all based on the so-called Alexander Yanai lessons. Starting in the 1950s, Moshe Feldenkrais recorded like a whole series of voice recordings to magnetic tapes. That was the technology in those days. And in my understanding, which I've gotten from hearing from people who were there, he had kind of a rhythm to his project where basically at the beginning of a week, he would teach a movement lesson to a live group of students, and he would record that. And then for the rest of the week, he would replay that tape for subsequent classes. And that way he could kind of observe how people were interpreting the movement instructions, what they were getting, what they weren't getting. And then if corrections or clarifications were necessary, he could, kind of dub over the tape, re-record little sections of it. And over the years he worked like this, he amassed like a huge number, like more than 550 of these taped lessons. Now, if you speak Hebrew and you're a Feldenkrais, follower, fan, actually I think you have to be a practitioner, but those original recordings from that, they were called Alexander Yanai because that's the street they were recorded on. But the original recordings are available, like you can listen to them. Now the problem is for those of us who don't understand Hebrew, it's like a big chunk of his work that's not accessible. Luckily, there's a enormous translation project that took place starting in the 1990s, going into the early 2000s, that made translated English transcriptions available. And here we get to the whole point of this project, which is basically I'm trying to just turn all those written transcriptions back into audio recordings. The Feldencast actually started with a little bit of a misstep on my part. I originally was just reading the transcriptions, making recordings, thinking to myself, oh, it's like a historical project. I just want to, read the transcriptions so that I can do the lessons that he taught, as he taught them. The problem with that is that the copyright of this material is held by the family of Moshe Feldenkrais. And they, as part of that translation project that I mentioned, they gave copyrights to this governing body called the International Feldenkrais Federation. And so they're the ones who control who gets to make recordings. Basically, nobody gets to make recordings of the transcripts. But there's a way that you can make recordings, which is to present the materials in your own words. And so my process with this Feldencast is to learn each lesson, well enough so that I can convey it in my own words, which I'm really happy to do because it helps me learn a lot, because you kind of have to, or I feel like I need to kind of get inside of the thought process that went into composing the lesson in order to internalize it enough to share it. It's my intention to include with each of these episodes information about kind of the source material so that anybody who's interested could go back and kind of understand where my presentation of the material might differ from Feldenkrais's. I'm doing this podcast because I really want to study these lessons and understand them and, develop my own sense of enjoyment around these lessons. And because the internet, I can share that. I can make it available to anybody to kind of follow along, to, respond to me on social media or email. And that's kind of amazing. So yeah, I'm just offering this. I'm offering it. There's a Buddhist teacher who wrote a little article about transparent generosity and how that kind of runs a certain segment of the teaching of like the way that the Buddhists figured out. So I'm kind of experimenting with just offering this, and I just want to end by saying that if you feel like you enjoy supporting the project, there's a Patreon page, www.patreon.com/Feldencast. So that's the introduction. Hope you find what you're looking for here, and if you don't, there are so many people teaching Feldenkrais online nowadays. This is just my project. Yeah, the little thing I'm spending my time on. But yeah, if you try some lessons here and you find they don't work for you, don't get discouraged. Keep looking around. There are people on YouTube. I'm sure Google will direct you to the people who've figured out how to best play the Google game. But yeah, there might even be local practitioners where you are. I mean, right now it's COVID, so I don't know about going to live classes, but hopefully this will be up for a while and you can just connect to the community. There's really interesting people doing this work, and yeah, please, if you feel resonance with this project, reach out. I'd love to get to know you, hear where you are, and hear how the lessons are fitting into your life. Okay, cheers.